What's up, guys? Will here with Rennthusiast, my YouTube channel centering on air-cooled Porsche 911 ownership experience. Welcome to What the Fooks, my weekly video series dedicated to featuring viewer answers to the air-cooled Porsche related questions we all have. This is episode 4 of What the Fooks out of an 8-episode series that I'm running. It's kind of an experimental series. It's a supplementary video per week to the one that I usually publish on Saturday morning. So I've gone from publishing 1 video a week to 2 videos a week. A little bit taxing. So the encouraging thing is What the Fooks has been pretty successful thus far. My first 2 What the Fooks videos kind of blew up. They did quite well. Last week's video on finding an air-cooled Porsche mechanic, not so much. It definitely fell on its face. A little discouraging, but guess what? You got to brush yourself off and just stand back up, and that's what I'm trying to do here. So in last week's video, at the very end, I asked you the following question. What's the best advice you give to a first-time air-cooled Porsche buyer? And I got over 100 answers to this question. So definitely blown away. There's a lot of really good experience-based opinions out there. And so I thought this video would be really, really good for anyone who's new in the market. There's a lot of you guys out there, apparently, based on the comments and the questions, the messages, I guess. And so I think it was, the reason I came up with this question was I thought it would be a really good resource for guys getting ready to take the dive into classic Porsche 911 ownership. So now I'm gonna take you through the comments from, some of the most insightful all the way to what I thought was the best comment. So let's get into it. The viewer Chris Matthews answered, these cars aren't for everyone, so my advice would be to ensure you drive 1, 2, 3, etc. Don't just buy with your heart or get so caught up in the romance of the idea. I think there's a lot of that going on now, quite frankly, especially like on Bring a Trailer. They are loud, stiff, analog, mechanical, and 25, 30, and 35 years old. Porsche as a brand is phenomenal and across all model years, so maybe your ideal air-cooled is actually a water-cooled. Ooh. There's a lot there, Chris. First of all, we don't talk about water-cooled Porsches on this channel. I'm just kidding. It might be that for a first-time buyer, they think that they're going to really enjoy an air-cooled Porsche, but they don't really think through how much it's going to cost them to own it and what the driving experience day in, day out would be like. So I think you're right to tell them to consider a water-cooled Porsche too, with the modern conveniences, solid air conditioning, and all that good stuff. I do want to touch on this idea of driving 1, 2, or 3, etc. I think for some of us who are looking to get into the market, it's not realistic to test drive an air-cooled Porsche 911. I bought my 95993 sight unseen, relatively speaking. I went through the whole remote buying process, felt really good about the seller. And I'm a seasoned car buyer anyway, so I kind of knew how to do that. But I never had driven an air-cooled Porsche before I bought that 993. And when it showed up, thankfully for my own sanity, I ended up loving it. So if you've been around this channel, I'm just in love with these cars. But, good insight, good advice. I don't know how realistic it is, especially for people who don't live in major metropolitan areas around a lot of air-cooled Porsches to be able to drive one, but smart nonetheless. Okay, Jeff Lehman, best advice when shopping for an air-cooled Porsche. Get to know the owner and the provenance of the car. I bought a car once and found the original owner through some of the repair receipts. He was hoping the car would end up in good hands and sent me an entire folder of information he'd collected over the years. That was pure gold. You're going to hear through this video, a lot of the advice has to do with like previous owners and how a car was treated and how you want to take that into account when you're buying your first air-cooled Porsche. And it sounds like Jeff got lucky here. I have had similar experiences with all 3 of my air-cooled Porsches. My 95993, I'm still in touch with the previous owner who I didn't have to hunt him down. I actually bought the car from him, so always available to me, especially early on in my ownership experience for questions and that kind of thing. My 86 911, I am still friends with the previous owner to this day, and in fact we have run in the same run group twice at an air-cooled Porsche rally that we both go to in the fall in Western North Carolina, and he lives down in Atlanta. So, the connection with the previous owner there is strong. The 964, not so much, but I was able to connect with a previous owner through social media, actually. He was either the 2 owners back or 3 owners back, but regardless, it was very cool. So bottom line is, Jeff, you're right. Get to know the owner and the provenance of the car. All right, next comment. Viewer Tony Manson. I bought my air-cooled 911 back in May of this year. My advice that is, unless there is something that you specifically need to have, it is best to have an open mind on exactly what year spec you go with and instead look for a car you connect with. I looked at many online, quite a few in the flesh, missed out on a couple, but found one that I really liked. Not perfect in every way, but I could see what I wanted to do with it and personalize for me. Plus it had some really good features and equipment. And here's the kicker. Sometimes it is best to go ahead with what is there and available right now rather than waiting for the perfect car that might be anything but perfect. This market's crazy. It's a seller's market. Good cars get snagged very, very quickly, so you better be competitive if you're going to find the exact spec you want. I agree with this viewer. I think it's better to have kind of a category or at least a generation that you're willing to look at. I know for myself as a buyer, I'd rather have a broader search and a better chance of getting something than being so narrow in what I'm willing to accept that it becomes this kind of endless hunt. So depending on what kind of a buyer you are, I would urge you to follow this advice this man just shared with you, because I think you could get into this cycle of like perpetual hunting versus actually just, you know, saying, hey, this car right here ticks most of the boxes, so I'm going to go ahead and jump on it. Viewer SB001, cheers from Belgium. Will, love the videos. Before I started searching for my 964, I read books, forums, and talked to people in the business or that were affiliated with Porsches. I then checked online auctions for photos to get to know how everything looks. At the same time, I made up a checklist of things to look out for. Very thorough buyer, very smart, because the 964 is not a cheap endeavor. The biggest tip would be, this is good. Don't get emotional, even though you will. You buy a 964 or an air-cooled Porsche with your heart, but you have to use your brain to support your choice. I went to see 10 964s, and every time I saw one, I thought, that's the one, until I started checking my checklist. I finally found the one that ticked all boxes for me. Then I had a PPI done. Oh man, you are much stronger than I am. So I don't know that I could look at 10 cars and not buy one of them. It sounds to me like you're the kind of buyer, SB001, who's very disciplined about your process. So if you, the viewer, are a first-time air-cooled Porsche buyer, you know, certainly this is going to be one of those strategies that's going to protect you from buying the wrong car, or a car with problems, or settling on a car that maybe doesn't make you happy later on. But it's going to require some extreme discipline, because, you know, when you do get around one of these cars, especially when it looks and sounds like the one you've been looking for, it's easy to get emotionally tied up and start to justify away problems. And, you know, I just think that's something you're going to have to deal with. Next comment, the aircraft mechanic. My best advice is get one now. Today is as cheap as they will ever be. I did the math on my 964 the way it has appreciated over the years, and it comes out to around $27 a day in appreciation since I bought it in 2019. Man, I grabbed this because I thought that was a pretty bold statement. Today is as cheap as they will ever be. I don't know if we can actually know that. The air-cooled Porsche market is ridiculous, like many vintage collectible cars are right now. You know, my best advice is to get one now. I would agree with that. Don't deprive yourself of the joy of owning one of these cars, but I don't know if I'll touch the value part of your comment here. So thanks for weighing in. My buddy Racer, this dude tends to leave some pretty good comments on these What the Fuchs videos. I have bought a few air-cooled and more modern. I am a pain in the ass when it comes, to being a buyer. I study the forums and know what to ask, etc. However, and this is interesting, when I get a seller on the phone and they give me one-word answers or grunt the answers at me, basically if I'm bugging them and it shows, then I walk. Someone who loves these cars and cares for these cars will talk your ears off, wanting to showcase how much they love the car and have cared for the car. I've talked about specifically this last section of his comment in previous videos, where, you know, you wanna buy the seller as much as you're buying the car, and when somebody has a lot of passion around that car, it shows. You know, I think sometimes they're unmotivated sellers, or sellers that are being overwhelmed with leads, and I think it's tough for them to remain friendly on the phone. But by the same token, I'm with you, Racer. If I'm talking to a seller and they're not really engaging me, like my suspicious mind goes, okay, you know, is this a flip? Are they trying to hide something on me? So, you know, I think that the net takeaway here in this comment is you're buying the seller and you really want to get somebody's car where they've been really excited about owning it. All right, Nate Mallory, short but sweet. My advice would be there's nothing more expensive than a cheap Porsche. Air-cooled or otherwise, do your research. That's exactly right. That's pretty sage, old school advice, but it's right. So good food for thought if you are a first-time air-cooled Porsche buyer. QBN T01, my life in Okinawa. You've been around the channel for quite a while. I appreciate the support and the engagement. Biggest bit of advice right now, save your money. They're expensive. I'm finding that out the hard way. I looked at this comment and I thought there's one of two ways to interpret it, it's like, hey, save your money, don't buy one because they're really, really painful to own. I tend to agree they can be painful to own. So anyway, that's one interpretation. The second interpretation is, hey, you know, make sure you have enough money saved because they tend to be expensive, and this viewer is finding that out the hard way. I just grabbed this comment because I thought it was, you know, pretty like kind of straight between your eyes. The fact is, look, they're not cheap to own, so save your money. All right, here we are, finally, the last best comment. There's a lot here, bear with me. This is Theodore, and he's a good dude. He's messaged me a couple times outside of the comments through Instagram, I think it was. So Theodore, thanks for weighing in. Hi, Will, love your channel. I know you asked for the single best advice when buying a Porsche, but you choose the most appropriate. And I thought all 3 bits were good. First, make sure your spouse or partner approves of your purchase. Destined to be a nightmare if left to them as a surprise. I'm very, very lucky. My wife has become like desensitized to the cars that cycle in and out of this very garage right here. But early on, certainly I needed her to be part of that process. So, you know, if you as a first-time buyer or a seasoned buyer don't have to deal with a significant other on that front, good for you. But it does tend to get expensive and time-consuming. So if you got somebody else on your team, definitely involve that person. That's good. Secondly, Murphy's Law applies. If anything can go wrong with your air-cooled Porsche, it will. Sorry about that pun, Will. Trust me, I know from experience. I agree with that too. If any of you guys out there have been watching my channel for any length of time, then you know that it can be painful to squeeze the joy out of these cars, meaning that they're expensive and problems come up and all that. In fact, I had a small fire in my 86 last week. So that's a different topic for a different day, but scary moment. And then finally, this is good. Last but not least, be patient and do your homework and choose the right Porsche that suits you and your budget. So I think that really kind of puts a nice fine point on the whole thing. Thank you guys for weighing in on all those comments. Now I'm going to give you the question that I want you to answer in the comments below, and I will be picking the best answers to this question for next week's What the Fooks video, and here it is. Will air-cooled Porsche 911 prices come down? So I would love for you to answer that question, and then feel free to blow it out. You know, say, no, you're crazy, I think they'll stabilize, I think they will come down, and this is when I think they will, or what a stupid question. Whatever you want to say in the comments below, say it. But again, the question is, will air-cooled Porsche 911 prices come down? So if you were still with me, I hope you got a little bit of fun out of this thing. And if you're a first-time air-cooled Porsche buyer, there's a lot of good advice here. I hope you got something out of that. And you know, I really appreciate you watching, and I do hope to see you next time. I'm out of here.